All right, yay, we are good to go, it looks like. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. Okay, Zoe, if you'd like to just check if you can share your screen properly with us. Perfect. All right, so just long story short, seems like the Western authentication security measure is pretty strong. They had some sort of firewalls in place to prevent us from doing our thing, but I'll keep this short. Welcome everybody to the first session of our conference week this year. As you know, this is our week to replace professional development with classes. We've got 27 sessions and this is number 1. So we are very excited to get our week underway. Want to start off by thanking Zoe Flatman, our speaker for today. She has a very interesting talk prepared for us and you've already read her bio, so you know what's up. I think the original format of this was about a 40-minute presentation followed by the 20-minute Q&A. So we'll just kind of adjust based on the time that we have allotted for this morning. But please feel free to put your questions in the chat. We will have a Q&A at the end. And also kindly ask that you take your audio and video off for the session. So just have it off so we're recording the session. So for others who missed this opportunity to join us. So yeah, without further ado, make sure you fill up your check for understanding form on the conference week website. And if you have any questions, let me, Zoe, know at the end of the session. Thank you so much, and let's get into it.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. I'm really excited to be here. I was at Western last year in person, but as all we're adjusting here today. So I'm going to try and fit in as much as I possibly can, although we've lost a few minutes. If I'm speaking too quickly, let me know. I do want to give you a chance to actually try some of the things that we have. So it's not just going to be a talk, it'll be a little bit more interactive. But let's get started really quickly. I want to talk a little bit today about blended learning, citizenship, civics, et cetera, democracy, and so on. But I'll get into the key things later. But the first thing I wanted to do is just kind of get a sense of who's here and what sort of your teaching environment, your teaching grades, et cetera, are. So I'm just going to pop a little link into the chat for you. If you could just fill out a quick little Google form for me, just to let me know what it is you're looking for, kind of thing, and that can help guide me in the way that I direct it. Oops, sorry, I sent the wrong, but that's okay. We'll just continue on in all the rush. So I'm getting lots of responses. This is actually the minds on to the first activity that I was going to share. The first link I wanted to share was a poll to see who you are and what your grades and so on are, but that's okay. We may as well jump right into the into what it is we're looking at. Okay, so I'm getting lots of responses, so keep those coming. As you are just finishing that off, I just wanted to let you know that the resources that I'm sharing today are resources that we've developed at Elections Canada, and they were released in 2018. They're all inquiry-based, cross-curricular, collaborative, non-partisan, bilingual, accessible, and free. They are inquiry-based in the sense that each has a big idea and an inquiry question that guides the lesson, as well as having a 3-part lesson structure. All of our resources have high-quality content, including videos, maps, data, infographics, case studies, and more. And you can order these kits as physical kits or download them from our website. Last March, we decided to adapt these resources to help in a blended learning kind of environment. And so we provided a blended learning adaptation for each of our key resources, and we provide a blended learning guide, and you can see a little photo there. We give you a menu of in-person and online adaptations of the different lessons. So each of these adaptations is based on the criteria for good blended learning pedagogy, including seamless connection, increased student-to-student, student-to-teacher collaboration, increased control of student time, place, pace, and path of learning, as well as repurposed time. And you'll see that in this activity a little bit, the idea that students can do a lot of the critical thinking offline or asynchronously, so that when you do come together as a class, you can use that time more effectively for conversation and that kind of thing. So the first activity that you've already started here is called Voting Rights Through Time. And the inquiry question is, how inclusive is our democracy? Each resource has a Minds On. The Minds On, in this case, you've just completed our blended learning adaptation. This is what you can see, what it looks like in a classroom. We ask students to think about a time that they felt excluded. We don't want them to write down the details. We just want to know the feeling. And the point of this is that we're helping students to co-create the criteria that they're going to be using throughout the lesson. So this is a really good pedagogical strategy to co-create criteria with your students. In this case, because we're asking students to be vulnerable and to share, we really want to be sure that we are giving them anonymity and allowing them to be vulnerable. So in this case, in a classroom, I would have students complete Post-it notes and we would paste them up in the classroom. For example, you can see here, this is a classroom working on this very activity, and that gentleman right there that you see in the photo is the Chief Electoral Officer of Canada, Stéphane Perreault, who visited a classroom in East York Collegiate in Toronto. So he's here working with grade 10 students on this particular activity. So in a classroom, we would have students fill out a Post-it note. Online, we've provided a Google form, as you can see, because it is anonymous, but we can still get students to share that experience. So once we've done this Minds On and we've created this criteria, and I like this picture with Stéphane again, because you can see in the background that the teacher's taken those Post-it notes and written down that criteria now on a chart so that students can use it. So what they're going to do now is, in groups, they are going to go through a set of cards. There are approximately 10 cards in each case study, and they're going to be using a timeline in order to sort those cards. So there are 4 case studies that we have: Japanese, Canadians, women, youth, and First Nations peoples. We're also working on an Inuit case study. At the moment, we're in consultation with ITK, and we're hoping to release this later on, perhaps for next school year. So students will take this set of cards, they'll place them in chronological order, but they're also going to be making judgments about whether this event led more inclusion or more exclusion, or is neutral on a scale of sort of 0, +1, +2 for inclusion, or -1, -2 for exclusion. So in the online adaptation, what we've done is we've provided a Google form. So in this case, students will rank. So here's a particular event. In 1867, the federal government takes on responsibility for First Nations peoples without asking them. You have to own property to vote in federal elections. Not many First Nations people own property. I mean, First Nations people, remember, were here, but they do not have the same definition of ownership as the settlers. So that's a key thing here. So students start with how inclusive or exclusive, and they go through and they rate them. Sorry, I'm speaking quickly, but if you have any questions, let me know. So this is an example of one of the case study backgrounders that we have. The other key thing in this resource is that we're bringing in historical thinking concepts. So in this case, we're looking at continuity and change. And so we provide students with a turning point frame that they can use to identify a turning point in this story. Okay. So the interesting thing I find about doing this in person in class is that every group, even if they're working on the same case study, every timeline will look different. Because what we want students to do is have those critical conversations. So we're not worried about where they ultimately place any of the cards. That's not the purpose of this activity. It's that critical conversation that they're having. And also where they place that turning point frame will differ. So it's their justification, the criteria that they've used, how they've made that selection that is most critical, not where they ultimately place that frame. So I am going to let you play around with one of our online adaptations. So I'll send you to the First Nations timeline, and you can see sort of how it would work in an online environment, and I hope perhaps also see how it would work even in person. So let me just get you the link here. Oops. So what you can do is go to this link and make yourself a new copy. So just take a copy of the timeline and you can practice moving them around a little bit. I'll give you a couple of minutes to just sort of play with that a little bit. And if you have any questions, feel free to type them into the chat here. So as you can see, these are a replica of the cards that students would get in person. So there's the photo on the front. The text is on the back. You can use Control-Alt-Y. If you're using a Mac, I believe the commands are, Option Command-Y or Control Command-Y. I can't remember, but one of those two options will also give you the text for each card, and you can decide where you want to move it to. So some of you may have seen something similar to this or heard of something similar. Some people call it a timeline with attitude or a timeitude. It's another term I've heard used where we're not just putting things in chronological order, but we're making judgments and we're using critical thinking to really assess a situation over time. And this is a great model that can be adopted or adapted to a whole variety of things. Okay, I'm just going to resume the PowerPoint. I think everybody got an idea of what you could do with this in moving it around. So as I say, we have 4 and soon we'll be having a 5th case study that comes along. So once the students are finished, this is where we can really start to have some of that really good conversation and filling out that form where students are assessing inclusion and exclusion is a good example of students having control over that time and pace of learning, because they can do that thinking on their own and then come together and do some comparison as class and work together on the timeline. it also is a good way to repurpose that instructional time. So once students have gone through those activities, they can now start to have some of that really meaningful conversation. And this is one of the questions that we suggest in the teacher guide. We have a teacher guide for all of the resources that explain how to use them in the lesson and throughout the class. But I think that this is a really pertinent question that really can bring up a lot of really great conversation. So if you're working in a history class or politics class, this would certainly be a really good question to start to ask and start thinking about how does this, how do we broaden this out, in a larger context. We also have an infographic. We have a video version, which is really short, or a paper version, and we ask students to think about, and I typically ask them ahead of time, what percentage of the population do you think had the vote in 1867? And according to our infographic, it was about 11%. So about 11% of the population was eligible to vote in 1867, and today that's about 72%. And so you can have a conversation about that change over time. Right? So that's a pretty substantial change that we see over
Zoe,
time.
I think your screen might not be sharing the PowerPoint. I think it's
okay. Sorry.
Screen.
Well, let's stop sharing and restart again, shall we?
Sometimes it bugs up.
Yeah, sometimes when we're jumping back and forth from tab to tab. Are you seeing it now?
Looks like it. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So I can go back one slide if you like. So this is our, this is the still students from East York, and they're working quietly on their reflection guide that we give them to sort of note as they're going through the class. But you could certainly, I would have a class discussion about this particular thing. Here's our infographic that shows who is eligible to vote and who is not in Canada. So essentially, as of 2019, you must be a Canadian citizen, 18 years of age or older, and there's only one Canadian citizen over the age of 18 who is not allowed to vote in federal elections, and that's the gentleman that you saw earlier, Stéphane Perreault. He's the only one who's not allowed to vote federally in that category. So to finish the lesson, we always give students an exit ticket for personal reflection. All of our, as I said, our resources are very much about collaboration. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of, oftentimes in some of our lessons, a lot of movement, and the class can be quite busy. So we really need to provide that time and space for some metacognition. How do we now transfer that learning into a longer term memory kind of situation? So what we want to do is provide students with an exit ticket that gives them the chance to personally reflect on what they've done throughout the lesson. So I think that I'm really proud of these lessons. I think they're built on very strong pedagogy, and no matter how you choose to use them, I think that there are a lot of things in there that can be really helpful in your practice over time. So does anybody have any questions? I was going to run through another one really quickly, but I know that if anybody has any questions, now would be a good time to ask them. Or I can share another quick resource with you. That is an excellent question, and I will share with you. We actually have our own website. There is a link from the Elections Canada website. I will show that to you before we go. I just wanted to know if there were any particular questions about that before maybe we dive into. I'll just go over really quickly another really great one that I love, Civic Action Then and Now, which looks at how young people can take action outside of the political process on an issue of importance to them. So seeing no question, shall I just go on? Okay, I hope that you can see that. So another one that we have that I think is really great and can be used, all of our resources are meant for secondary schools, but this one certainly, all of them can be brought down and certainly into the 7-8 level, and some of them could be used maybe in a grade 5-6 level. We all have language learner versions of most of our resources, so they may be accessible to a younger audience as well. So civic action then and now, how the inquiry question here is, how can you take action to make a difference? So really quickly, in a classroom, we would ask students to either write quietly in the thinking guide that we give them. I often have them use Post-it notes to post them on the board at the front of the room, and we can think about you know, how do we divide these to different levels of government, or what are some different themes that people are interested in? In the online version, we also have you could use a Jamboard. I hope you all can see that. So again, students can just pick up a sticky note and type, you know, whatever it is that is bothering them, or something they want to act on, so they can stick their sticky note on the board. This is an example from a grade 10 civics class in Durham region, their virtual school. I was working with a class there, and these are the things that they came up with as important to them, and we sorted them by theme. So there's lots of creative ways that you could use this in a blended learning environment. We have 2 case studies in this resource, Women and the Right to Vote, and we also have an Indigenous case study. So both of these videos are about 2 minutes each, and they give students background into the case study, just to give them a general idea. It's also a really good introduction because they touch on some of the ways that these groups went about bringing about change. So we then introduce our students to the model of how to take civic action. And this is a model that we came up with based on the work of Alan Sears, who's done a lot of work on civic engagement and citizenship and civics work with students. So we would maybe use examples from the videos to think about what these 4 things look like. And then again, students in a face-to-face classroom are given a set of cards. They work as a group. Usually I ask one student to sort of deal them out, and they take turns reading aloud and then deciding as a group where they're going to place those cards. And that again is really the key part of this activity. We do offer a potential response guide, but we're not so concerned about their ultimate choice. We want them to have that critical conversation, and we want them to think about how there are so many different things that can be done and so many different ways to act that all come together to form that bigger picture to bring about change. So for example, this is one of the cards in the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights case study and the Women and the Right to Vote. So there are about 20 cards in the regular version. In the language learner version, there are about 14 cards. So our language learner versions generally have fewer cards and simpler vocabulary, so that they're more accessible to students for whom English is a second language, or for younger students. So they go through the case study, they place them in the appropriate section on the model, the mat that we provide them. And then for the online version, again, we've created, and I'll share the link with you. And again, you can go and play for a minute. So this is the link to the Aboriginal and Treaty Rights case study. You'll notice that there are, if you go to the left or the right, there are cards, we've placed one on each category just to help students get started. But if you go to one side or the other, there are additional cards. So students would read those cards and then drag them to the column where they believe it fits. So for example, take it to the world. First Nations leaders traveled to Britain and Europe and spoke to the United Nations Assembly. So maybe it's building public support, or maybe it's working through the political system, or half and half. I'm a place it on the line kind of person. I find it hard sometimes to make those decisions. So in doing this activity in a classroom, I would likely have students in breakout rooms working on this together and have them having that conversation, because that's really the important part of this. I'm just sort of giving you access to have a quick look at it and see how it could work. But I would probably want my students to be in groups working on this. Okay. Yep, I paused the screen share. Thank you. Okay, are we seeing the PowerPoint again? I don't have the chat up, so if someone can just let me know yes or no verbally.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So after the students have placed all of this and they've had this experience of understanding how all of these parts and pieces come together, we would have a conversation about what would happen if we removed one of these 4 sections. Would this case study have been as successful? And the short answer we hope that students come to is probably not, right? So that we need all of these different varieties of ways of acting in order for folks to achieve a goal, right? And it's really hard to remove one and still have a success. So in class, we would provide students with a thinking guide, which includes an exit card and a paper copy of the organizer that you see here. For online, we provide a Google Doc version where students now are thinking about, how can they take action? So they're going back to that action that they identified at the beginning of the activity. Think now that they have a little bit more understanding about the ways that people can act and engage, they can start to think about how they can plan an action based on this learning, based on the issue that they identified at the beginning. So this is really great in a civics class, for example, or even a younger grade, even a grade 5 class could do something like this and think about, maybe then they want to take a class action, think about as a class, what are we most concerned about and what can we do as a class to bring about that change. In a civics class, it's a great way to introduce active citizenship. It's also a great way to introduce a summative in the course where students now are going to think about taking on an issue of importance to them. So that is the speed round of presentation for today. I'll just pause the sharing again. Oops. And what I would like is I'd like to get your feedback really quickly. I know you're going to be filling out a form for Western, but I wanted to get a little bit of feedback about some of the things that you may have learned today that might be useful for you. So I've put a link in the chat. How about now? Okay, sorry. So citizenship is part of the curriculum documents. So the Ontario curriculum documents have citizenship as a foundation, and in that there are a whole lot of expectations and underpinnings for all of the curriculum. The other thing that we know from the Elections Canada side is that youth vote in the lowest rates of all age groups. So in 2019, about 54% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted in the federal election, whereas in the 65-year-old and plus categories, you're somewhere between 75 and 80% voter turnout. So we know that young people are not coming out to vote, and so what we want to do is we want to encourage them to become active. From Elections Canada perspective, we want them to be active as voters, but we also, as teachers, want them to be active citizens in a variety of ways. So engaging young people in the democratic process to help make decisions is really important. They're the ones that are going to live with the consequences of the decisions that are made today. They're going to live the longest with those consequences, so it's really important that we engage them. We know from our studies that young people who are exposed to ideas around elections and democracy in schools are more likely to become future voters. So that's really, from our perspective, that's really what we're hoping to achieve and what we want to help teachers to do in their classrooms. So excellent question. Are there any other questions? You know, some people, particularly students and some teachers too, don't feel confident in talking about issues like elections and democracy. That, you know, some students will come to it from the perspective, oh, politics is boring, I don't care, you know. But what we want to do is engage them in a way that they can see that this is important, and we want it to reach them at a point where they are. So we don't want to memorize, you know, the duties of all of the Governor General and the Prime Minister and all of that. I want them to be more engaged around the idea of democracy and citizenship as important concepts. No more questions? Okay. So I will share with you where you can get all of our resources. I've only shown you two. But I will show you. These are all of the resources that we have. So the ones we looked at are at the top here: voting rights through time and civic action. The first one, digital skills, is an amazing digital literacy piece that is great for any high school course, really. We don't have a language learner version of that particular resource, so it really is difficult to bring it down into lower grades, but it's great for any secondary classroom. Does voting matter? It's a lot of fun, and it really, that's the inquiry question for that resource, and it really gets at the idea of, you know, that question. Excuse me, just a minute. Which election was, excuse me, developed, sorry, in cooperation with all of the electoral management bodies in Canada, including the provinces and territories. And it looks at level of government, responsibilities of different levels, and how different levels actually administer elections. Elections by the numbers is a great numeracy piece, which looks at voter turnout. And then we have a couple of geography resources as well. And where can you get them? That's the question everybody's been wondering. And our education website is electionsanddemocracy.ca. You can follow us on social media at Democracy.ca in English, at Démocratie.ca in French, and as well on Facebook. So a reminder for if you have any French immersion colleagues or Francophone teacher colleagues. All of our resources are available in both official languages. So are there any other questions at this time?
Zoe, I did have a quick question for you. I was wondering, how can we make these types of resources, I guess, inclusive for those who may not be, Canadian citizens or maybe new to Canada? I'm just wondering, how can we encourage those learners to become involved with this process?
Well, I think that that's why something like Civic Action Then and Now is really good, because it does provide space for becoming an active citizen outside the electoral process. You're right that there are restrictions on voting. The restrictions are generally tighter on federal elections. Some provinces and municipalities have looser qualifications, but all of our resources, so if you look at the geography ones, they also are really good, because they do, in the geography of elections, for example, we compare electoral communities, and we use a lot of data around language, for example. So we talk about how many folks have a first language that's other than English or French or Indigenous. What is the main language in each area, or the language that was cited the most, other than the official languages. So for example, it might surprise some people that in Yukon, the most spoken language other than English, French, or Indigenous is Tagalog, which is a Philippine dialect, right? So we do have access points like that. And voting rights through time, I think, is a really good entry point as well, to think about, well, we went from 11% to 72%. Is there a way that we can increase that participation or that eligibility amount, and so on? So a teacher can certainly take it in that direction if that's what they want to do. So all of these are meant to be completed in one class period, 60 to 75 minutes. But what we really hope is that they're jumping off points for further inquiry. And the teacher then is going to look at their curriculum and decide, how does this fit into my curriculum? What are my goals with this, and where do I want to go next? So that certainly could be a place where they could go next. I know people have probably to get to another session pretty soon. If you would like, I can just take a quick walk through our website to show you some of the features that might be of interest to you to see. For example, our curriculum connections and so on that we have on the website. Is that something you folks would like to see? All righty, I have one yes, please. That's all I need. Okay, so I'm hoping you're seeing this is our website, electionsanddemocracy.ca. You can see we also have the French version where everything is available. It's exactly the same in French. So a couple of important things that we have. We have teacher support videos. These are about 5 minutes in length, and each one just generally goes through how you might use this resource in a face-to-face class. We filmed these about a year ago, a little over a year ago. So they don't have the blended learning adaptations in them, but you can still get a sense of how each resource would work in a classroom. We are offering interactive group workshops like this. So if there are student association who wanted to look at one of the other resources more in depth, then you can reach out, and we will certainly put something together for you. If we go to our helpful tools page, we have a curriculum connection, as you can see, for every province and territory in the country. And this is where it's interesting. So you could search by keyword like geography. For example, I'm going to limit it to English. So you can see that here are a bunch of geography courses, and we will list which resources would fit into that particular course, or if you want to search by resource. So we looked at voting rights through time today. So these are all of the courses where we've identified specific expectations and where this particular resource can fit. So we've given a lot of information here. The other thing, so if you go to the learning pages, let's take a look at Civic Action. Everything's available here. Here's where you can get our blended learning tool. So if we click on that, it takes us to our Google, and here's the guide, and then all the tools are in there. They are force copy. But we have everything here as well. So the videos are here, they're on our YouTube channel. The cards are here, as well as the language learner version cards, so you can download and print if you want. The other thing that we have is this activity and voting rights. We also provide blank cards so that students can create their own case study if you wish. And of course, you can order. Here's our order form. So you just simply fill it out and you choose which ones you want. So you can see here that we have the regular and the language learner versions. You can order whatever resources that you need. If there are any folks here who are from the elementary panel, let's just go straight to classroom, back to learning resources. We have Choosing Our Mascot, which is a great resource for K-3 or K-4. And our election simulation toolkit is great for grade 5 as well, if that's your grade level. We are not at the moment working on junior grades. The main reason is that our mandate, when the Civic Education Department was formed, the mandate was to reach pre-voters who are age 14 to 18. So what we're trying to do is to create resources that are going to help engage those folks who are much closer to voting age. So we do have those 2 resources for the younger grades. I know Elections Ontario is working on upgrading their resources. If you've seen Voting Rules, it's a good resource, but it's getting dated. So they are working on, they've just hired someone to oversee that project, and that'll be going on until I believe August 2022 is the end date for that. And so they will have more specific junior grade resources. Oh, that's the best news ever. There is no cost to our resources. They are absolutely free, no delivery, no shipping, no handling, no nothing. You can order the resources on our website for free. They will be sent to you. Our distribution center is open. Each resource has enough for 1 classroom. So if you order the voting rights through time resource, for example, the first one we looked at, you'll get 6 of the large timelines, and you'll get 2 each of the, or I guess you get 8 timelines, sorry, and 2 each of the case studies. For the Civic Action, you get 6 of the activity mats, the model, and then you get 3 sets of each case study. So they are designed for use in 1 class. If you have a larger class, you can always print off extra and use them in your class. So yes, everything is 100% free of charge. It's all available online, or you can order. Good question. And you're young teacher candidates, so you know everything that's free. You know, it's a bonus. Resources are often difficult to come across, but we're here to help and support you. You get them now, absolutely. Order them now. Any other questions? I don't see any more questions, and I know you need probably need a little quick break before you go to your next session. So thank you very much. And
Thank you
can
so much,
reach it.
Zoe.
My pleasure. You can always reach us at our inbox. I'll just put it up. Or you can reach out to me.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We want to thank Zoe again for this wonderful session, and thank you everyone for joining us as well and bringing your wonderful questions. Hopefully we'll be able to use this all soon in the classroom. So hopefully everyone will have a great rest of their conference week as well.
Thanks so much.